entrepreneurs remain shadowed. Here, I team up with these hidden talents to unveil their challenges and successes. Dive in with me to unearth entrepreneurial gems, learn from our experiences, and get educated. It's awesome to have you, Emily, on the show. Ladies and gentlemen, we have Emily Williams here, and I give you just a tad bit of backstory. But I was reading an article in the newspaper down here in Florida, where we are for the winter. And I read an article on Emily, and I was so touched by what was in the article. I looked at my wife, Tennille, and I went, we've got to reach out to this girl. And I'd love to see if we could get her on the podcast and have a conversation with her first to make sure if it's like she's real and she's legit. and we did, and we, spent some time with her and just love her and love her story. And I wanted to get her on the podcast because the reason is because we're all going through things. First of all, it kind of started as like, we're just as we're recording this, International Women's Day was 3 days ago or 2 days ago. And so, I wanted to make sure that we honored, the feminine energy in women and not just in business, but just in life in general. And so it's a great, I guess, timing is what you would say from when we met and when I read your article. And I just wanted to really draw attention to a topic that we haven't covered on the podcast yet. And it may not necessarily be business related, but again, as I say constantly on the show in the last, 80 episodes we've had, is that, business is just a series of relationships. And those relationships include, everything that circles around our business, with our customers, with the people that work for us, our intimate relationships, and inside our relationships and with others, whether they're really deep relationships or surface relationships, many people can be dealing with things underneath the surface. And so what we're going to talk about with Emily and what I think her life epitomizes is that story of, from rise to fall, back to rise, and what's happening under the surface and how we can be aware of it and what we can do. So that is the story to me, is that just human story that you have in your life.
100%. And it's an honor to be here. Like, I've never done anything like this. And it was a pleasure to meet you guys. And I'm really honored to be able to do this. And hopefully my story, even if it reaches one person or, that's worth it to me. So,
well, the honor is, first of all, mine. Not only, to have met you and chatted with you and to hear your story, but to see the courage that you have. Like, you're somebody, you don't do this for a living. This is not your thing. You've never been on a podcast before, but you're willing to share your story. You're willing to talk. And when we had this conversation between you and my wife and I was like struck by how honest you were. And actually, for the listeners, you all know that I don't come prepared for a conversation, that I like to see Grace step in and see where it goes. And I remember we were talking, and you had to get up and go deal with something, and I looked at Tennille. I'm like, we got to stop this conversation because I don't want to hear anymore. I do want to hear. Like, I was on the edge of my seat, but I didn't want to hear anymore because I didn't want to be tainted in what, how Grace will show up for this conversation.
Right.
So
bless authenticity, you, I should say.
Yeah. Bless you for being here. Bless you for your courage.
Bless you for having me. Thank you.
And hopefully this does touch people. And not only is the story crazy, but it's heartwarming, and I think it can help and it can draw attention. So sorry guys for the long run up. Hopefully maybe we'll edit some of that blabber that I just dissertated on. But Emily, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much.
So 2000 up until 2001, you're
Up
how
until
old are you?
2003, I'm 43 now.
You're 43 now. So you're 20 years old. You were basically riding the high life of a sport.
Yeah, I was without trying to sound arrogant. Again, I'm coming up with a bit of a cold, so I sound literally hoarse, no pun intended. I was what you would call a child prodigy. You know, I was born with a God gifted amount of talent for riding horses, and I loved it. And because of that talent, I was not only, you know, got to ride whatever horses my dad was able to provide for me, but you know, we weren't poor, but my dad was a great horseman, so he could get horses that maybe were very expensive, but other people couldn't manage or something. So he could, and therefore I could get a valuable horse that had lost its value to anyone else because my dad could keep it sound or whatever. And then I also was very often asked to catch ride, which is like you know, ride horses for other people to make them more valuable or to get points for kids that didn't ride as well to qualify them for bigger events, and was very lucky to be exposed to some of the best teachers in the world because of my talent. They offered to teach me for free, where you know, that doesn't happen very often. And I won more by the time I was 23. Like, you know, one of the best jobs, had the horse of a lifetime, won the Hunter Spectacular 3 years in a row on the same horse that had never been done before, was leading hunter rider. Sorry, I'll get emotional. You know, but you don't think that you take those things for granted until you lose them. And I basically gave them away. You know, I went from the most disciplined. I was disciplined as a kid myself, even to the point where my parents would wonder where I got this discipline from. To, you know, losing my mother, and then, you know, it started out as partying recreationally. You know, like, I was very against it. I was allowed to go out at a young age. I even had a fake ID, but I didn't drink. I respected that I rode other people's horses. You know, if everybody was partying after, I would take a nap and I would wake up and I would drive everyone home. And then it got to a point where I was like, fine, like, what is this that everyone is so into, you know? And I finally was like, fine, let me try it. I remember I you know, got in an argument with my dad, never thinking about what he was going through, losing my mother. I just resented him for not being her. Sorry. And that's how I got out of control. And it took me probably 12 years before I even realized that's what was driving me, if that makes sense.
Let me just back this up a little bit for the listener so they can catch up. So really, you know, in this sport, but it could be, guys, it could be any sport, it could be business, it could be anything that we apply this to. But Emily essentially is the creme de la creme of junior horse riding in North America. And she's literally top of the sport.
And then I was one of the youngest professionals to win everything that I won.
Yeah. And so think about how this would apply to somebody in golf, basketball, I mean, football, any of these sports, soccer, that, you know, you rise to this level, live a super clean life. And she has a tragedy of loss in 2001 where your mother died. And do you want to maybe just frame that a little bit for the audience so they can understand?
Yeah, I'm going to try to stop crying so much. She had breast cancer, and it metastasized very quickly. She only ever went into remission for 6 months. And she was just a fighter, you know. I didn't know because my parents didn't tell me. But several times, I guess they only gave her months to live, and she would just be like, I'm not going to die yet. I'm going to watch Emily win this, or I'm gonna see Emily win this. And they didn't tell me until after she finally passed it how many times they'd given her 6 months to live, and she was just like a miracle. Like she ended up living like 5 more years. She just refused to give up because she wanted to see her daughter. She was my best friend.
And obviously it causes still a lot of pain. And then, post your mother dying, then you start to use drugs and alcohol, or
It was, I mean, yes, I drank some, but that wasn't, I wouldn't say my main problem. It was basically any kind of uppers. And, it started out very recreational. Like I was still disciplined. Like I would never do it when I was showing. Even if other people were partying or something, I would go to bed. Even if they were at my house, I'd go to bed at 9 and leave everyone to do their thing. And then it slowly started to take over, and I ended up quitting the job that I had that I loved so much. And you have all these people that care about you, but they're not your mom, and they can see you struggling. And my poor dad, he and I get along, but my mother and I are very similar. And she was a peacekeeper, and so I resented him a lot for not being her, and I didn't realize that's what I was doing, but that's what I was doing. And I was too selfish and caught up in running away from my problems to think about the fact that he was trying to deal with losing the love of his life and, all that kind of stuff. I was just like, I'll show him I don't have to be as perfect as he thinks that I'm going to be. And I don't have to be who everyone thinks I'm going to be, and all, just stupid self-sabotaging things. And then having to convince myself, because I have a very high moral compass naturally. So I had to literally lie to myself and BS myself, for a lack of a better term, into being okay with who I was, which I completely was not okay with. I hated myself for what I had become, for what I'd given up, for what I'd put my family through.
can I, if we could just go back, because I think this is really important, because, there's so many people who are parents that listen to the show. There are people who own businesses. And I think there's a piece here. There was something that you said that I really wanted to try to hone in on, because I think it's important, because so often we frame, we don't know exactly what's going on underneath the surface, like I said at the very beginning, with especially kids, and whether they're male or female, and so we make judgments, or we form opinions of what they should or shouldn't do, or how they should behave or how they shouldn't behave. And you kind of had mentioned something about, you kind of said to the effect of, I'll show my dad that you don't have to be who he thinks you are. And so to me, that sounded like there was a rebellion there. And so obviously, your mom passes away. There's deep grief, which, and maybe we should talk about that too, about maybe it not, if you could reverse the clock in hindsight and do it over again, what kind of support would you have wanted as a teenager? or young adult. I guess
Yeah.
you're more than a teenager at that time, but as a young adult, what kind of support would you have liked? What did you feel you were lacking at that time, you know, with your mother's passing? Because I kind of want to, maybe we take this chronologically.
Yeah. Maybe I'm going too deep on all of it, but you know, my mom and I were very, very close. And in fact, I would be, when I think about it, if I don't think I would have ever become an addict if she were still around, without trying to make an excuse, if that makes sense. Because I told her everything. Like, even if I thought of like drinking or doing something wrong when I was a little kid, I told her. Like, there were no secrets. And she always taught me family first. And you know, my dad also said, you know, he would be in jail or dead if he never met my mother. You know, she was an amazing woman. But she, because of the cancer and everything, and my dad and I talk a lot that, you know, we would have almost rather had her for a shorter amount of time than for her lack and quality of life of what she went through with the radiation and the chemo and losing her hair so many times. Then she lost her short-term memory, and then she became like a different person. And we weren't very patient with her, and I feel a lot of guilt towards that.
She passes, you carry this guilt and some resentment towards dad.
Yeah. And he really wasn't doing anything wrong. He was dealing with it the only way he knew how, you know what I mean? And that wasn't good enough for me. And then he started dating someone, and that really set me off. So then I was like, oh, you're going to start dating someone. I mean, you know, the only person I was really self-destructing was myself, and causing him a lot of stress because he didn't know how to get me under control. The more he tried to control me, the more. Right. Like that. I'm a little bit like that. Like, if you're going to try it, if you tell me not to do something, even if I wasn't planning on ever doing it, watch me. You know, like, I'm not too much like that anymore. Like, I actually use my brain, but I went through a period of time where it was like, if you think I won't do that, I'll show you, you know, like.
And we all know, I mean, as you say that, you know, I'm sure a lot of people are shaking their heads going, yep, I either have a child or I have somebody who works for me that is just like that. And, or I was like that when I was younger. And do you think that's like, I'm curious, one of the thoughts that just popped in my head as you were saying this is like, did the loss create like some selfishness, if you will, back then, that it was like,
For sure. And also, maybe a key part that I've left out is that my father's also a professional in the same business as me. So there was always a lot of turmoil with us working together, which my mother was very smart about. Like, from the time I was 9, she was like, we're not taking this home every single night. Like, if the horses went well, things were great. If they didn't go well, it was like we were talking about it at dinner until I went to bed about, why did you do this? Why did you do that? You know, and my mom was like, family comes first. And of course, you'll say things to your parents that you will not say to another professional. You know, you'll say something totally inappropriate to your parents that you would never say to someone, you know, that else that is teaching you. And so she brought someone else in at a young age to start helping me for that reason, because she was like, we are going to have a family first, you know. And so then that was a huge, again, selfishness. I still, you know, my dad thinks I blame him for a lot, and I don't at all. You know, it was my own doing.
at the end of the day, I think sometimes, you know, you can't see the frame of the picture you're in.
Yeah.
And so you don't really know the place that you're projecting from.
Yeah.
And As you were telling the story, it kind of reminded me, and I don't know why, weirdly, this guy came into my mind, but, Mike Tyson came into my mind, that when he lost his trainer, who basically was his father figure, uh, it was such a huge, wasn't just, it was best friend, father figure, trainer, the person that was the foundation for his life. And it sounds like your mother was like that for you.
Yeah.
And in this loss, you go, well, I don't know what to do next.
Right.
And then, of course, now you then get into drugs because now you're rebelling.
Exactly.
Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm just curious, like, how did the drugs start?
Most teenagers do it somewhat recreationally. To be perfectly frank, I probably took like one of my friend's Adderall, like to go out one night, and it just kept me up. I didn't even know like what it was really, and we had some drinks, and then I remember I wanted to go to bed. Nobody told me that once you take this, you can't go to sleep. And so I just remember like being miserable trying to sleep. So a normal person's brain would be like, okay, I'm never going to do that again because it made me feel like shit. I couldn't sleep. I ended up having to go like drive to the grocery store in my friend's mom's brand new white Jaguar that had white leather seats, and through Greenwich, Connecticut, on these windy roads, and I was just trying so hard not to throw up inside of her car. But of course I did it again, you know what I mean? And then it was like, that was easy to get prescribed because I am literally do have ADD. And then I would abuse it. I would give it to my friends. We would all take it to go out. It seemed harmless, and it was harmless for a while. Like it was only on Sunday nights. And then cocaine is very prevalent in the sport, and there's a lot of people with too much money and too much time on their hands. And I had to do this professionally. I couldn't afford to be hungover every day and be like, oh, guess what? I don't think I'm going to show today. Like that wasn't an option for me. But Sundays would turn into Tuesdays, and it started to mess with my priorities, and I went, in and out of rehabs. Like I remember I told my dad the very first time that I wanted to go, and he was like, I thought you were better. And I was like, no, I'm not. I need to go. And that was for the Adderall because it scared me, because I was like, I don't want to have to take a pill for the rest of my life. And I didn't feel like I could wake up without it.
At this stage, are you doing just Adderall, and how old are you, and how many?
I was in my probably mid-20s.
Okay, so you're 2006-ish? Yeah.
Probably. What happened was I quit that job and I went back to school. I went on a full scholarship to Savannah College of Art and Design. I'm lucky I have so many people that do care about me, but my mother was gone, so everyone was trying to save me. And so they were like, well, what if something happens to you and then you don't have anything to fall back on? And the only other thing that ever interested me besides horses was like fashion. And so I was able to get a full scholarship to Savannah College of Art and Design, and for my riding. But I think I was telling you guys this, I won a state drawing contest in Minnesota when I was 5 years old, for like a Smokey the Bear thing. And like literally that was the extent of my artistic abilities.
But you're there riding.
Right.
So you get a full ride scholarship.
Yes.
As a rider,
Yes.
Just so that everybody understands. So your sport got you into the school.
But I'm in an art school.
Which you have really no connection
and
to.
Everyone else is there on art scholarships, and I'm like, can barely draw a stick figure, right? So, and to have a full scholarship, you have to keep very good grades, which I never had trouble with in regular school, but in art school, that's completely different. It was like Greek to me, So for me, just to keep my scholarship, I wasn't able to leave on the weekends and show in the Grand Prix like I thought I was going to be able to, because I was busting my rear end to get a B- to try to keep my scholarship.
Are you using drugs at this time?
I was using like Adderall and things like that. Well, that was when it really started to get out of control, because then I didn't really have any responsibility. You know what I mean? I didn't have my Grand Prix horses. Like all I had to do was try to get this artwork done. And like, I basically had no responsibilities. So then it really got out of control because I didn't have much to care about. And so then the abuse started getting worse and worse. And it's also very prevalent in schools, like that, you know, people are studying, it's easy to get, like, and then I started dating someone much older than me that lived in Miami that was a club promoter. I ended up dropping out of school, almost got completely cut out of my family because of it. Then really liked, I always joke that, you know, I went to Miami one time and I didn't come back for about 10 years. You know, I got really into the party lifestyle there. It was a little bit of everything, like ecstasy. The one thing I never did was like heroin or crack or anything like that, thank God. Mostly uppers. And I love to dance. I love to dance sober still. So I ended up dropping out of school, like finished the semester, and then I felt guilty about that because my best friend's mother had gotten me this scholarship, and then I felt like I let her down. Then fast forward, let's just say I went to another treatment center for cocaine, but and I was always in the rehabs. I was, you know, the number one student. I was the mayor. I was the whatever the top person was, and I would be like, I really think I've changed this time, da da da. And then, but in rehab, you're in a bubble, you know. And the second that, okay, you're good, and then they send you home, and you've learned some suggestions, but none of it is how to apply it to your life. And most of the time, I was doing it because I thought it was going to make my dad happy, or you know, what was gonna, you know, I guess in my own head, I was still in so much denial and stuff that I knew I had some issues, but I always still thought somehow I could control it. Like I wasn't done. And then, you know, there was times when I'd be better than others and this, that, and the other thing. But then, you know, it's hard to get a job because I wasn't reliable. You know, like people would sometimes take a chance on me, but I didn't even believe in myself. Like, why would somebody else believe in me? You know what I mean? Like, even when I wanted to show up on time, I was never on time. Like, I felt like I was a slave to whatever medication I was on because most of what I was taking was how I was getting out of bed in the morning, which then messed up my riding because it made me overthink my riding, which is what I'm good at because I don't think about it. I just do it. And so fast forward, I met someone who I'd known for a very long time, who I thought I was going to spend the rest of my life with. I was semi-sober when I met him. Like I wasn't drinking or anything. And we went on vacation together. And when we got to the hotel, they had champagne. We had a glass of champagne that was like off to the races. It was like the two of us together on drugs was a disaster. And then there was I don't blame him because I chose to stay. But it got very, very toxic, abusive, cheating.
I want to rewind here before we get too far ahead, but just so I can flip back to it, I'm curious. There was a couple things that I heard, and we can do one at a time here, but you made a comment about not having responsibility, and you said it really started to accelerate or really blew up because I didn't have any responsibility. So that was one thing I wanted to talk about. The other thing was about the guilt, about letting other people down, and then the belief in self. And the reason why I want to circle back and is because number one, your vulnerability is incredible and your courage is amazing, and so thank you for that. But and I want people to hear some of these things at a little deeper level, so that they can understand whether it's, you know, you're passing a homeless person, because you did spend some time homeless for a while. When you see somebody homeless on the street, like we often forget that that person had a different life before that.
Yeah, they could have lived in an $18 million house. You know what I mean? You don't
know.
you have no idea.
You don't. And so I think it just puts perspective not only on that, but it also puts perspective on, you know, where our kids might be at a certain time, and we don't see it because all we see is our own reflection or our own fear or our own anger or our own denial, rather than, you know, what they feel. And so if you don't mind, you know, on the acceleration part of, and because you didn't have responsibility, because I found that interesting because I think, you know, there's a great book called Coddling, so great, I forgot the title. Coddling the American Mind, I think it's called. But that we're not, you know, the kids nowadays don't have enough responsibility. There's not enough put on them. We think like we're actually trying to save them, but we're not really saving them.
No, they're almost entitled.
Right. And that distinction about like not having responsibility was really, I found really interesting. And so I wonder if you could just dive into that and how that feeling of lack of responsibility allowed you to just let go of
the horses and the horse industry. When you're young, if you really are disciplined and you want to be good at it, it teaches you at a very young age an incredible amount of discipline and responsibility, and just naturally. And if you know, I was very passionate about it and I was talented, and I wasn't going to be second because I didn't do my homework, let's put it that way, you know. And so then once I didn't feel like I had anything to care about, including myself, it just, then there was the guilt and the hatred and it just spiraled and spiraled and spiraled and spiraled and spiraled. Not having the responsibility, you know, then it was like, fine, I can just be messed up all the time. It doesn't even matter. And then, you know, I lost confidence in my riding ability, like, because I hadn't ridden for a while. Then everyone knew that I had gone from being the best, you know, I was on the way to the Olympics basically, to becoming a joke. So I was ashamed. It's just such it's so mental, you know, as is anything. I had myself convinced that I didn't deserve to get my life back. I didn't think I could get my life back. I didn't think that I deserved to put my father through anything else. You know, I ended up the last 2 years with said boyfriend on meth, which was terrifying.
So you use the word shame, ashamed, and so the feeling of shame. What do you wish, like at that time there, where you didn't have the responsibility, you know, then the drugs started to swirl up, the partying started to swirl up. When you look back at it now, what do you wish could have or would have happened? From the level of, you know, if somebody were to show up in a way that would have helped support you through that time in your life and the grief that you were suffering from your mom's loss and that emptiness. And what do you wish? So what somebody how they would have shown up, and then what do you wish you would have done differently?
I don't think anybody could have saved me besides maybe my mother. Because I didn't disrespect anyone. Like, one of my, still to this day, that I look up to, best friend in the world, is Kent Farrington, and he tried to save me so many times. And he was probably the one person that I would always listen to, or, you know, he would get my attention. But I respected everything he was saying, but it didn't matter.
It didn't take the story away of shame.
Yeah, it
and
was
guilt.
like I felt like I was so far gone that
What's the use?
yeah.
Not to put words in your mouth.
No, but totally like it was like I understood exactly what he was saying. Again, the guilt. I still feel guilt from what I put him through, for anybody that cares about me through. Because I think maybe it came off as that I didn't care, or that I wasn't listening, or that, you know, that I was blowing them off, or that I was isolating, or thought I was better than everyone, or whatever. And or that I was so cool because I was partying. Like, I never felt cool. I felt so small. Just the opposite, everything was a a disguise, basically. Trying to cover up for. I didn't want anybody to see who I really was.
Mm.
I couldn't understand why people couldn't see who I really was. That I was still the same person underneath it all. Um, and all people saw me as was a failure, drug addict, F up, uh, someone that you can't trust, that's unreliable, that is a has been, had all the talent, and, took it for granted and gave it all away. Uh, and then I think I felt sorry for myself for that, to some degree. Like,
Sure. Well, it's interesting. So some of my takeaways here that I'm gleaning from what you're sharing with us is that intellectually you could talk to somebody and understand, hey, like the train's on the wrong track, I'm on the wrong path, I'm heading in the wrong direction, but yet, and then I think maybe how I would frame this is, but you please correct me if I'm wrong, but that the story that you had created about your life, about, the guilt, about the shame, about the, being less than or not, letting people down, that story takes over the intellectual intelligence of knowing one thing, but not being able to control yourself or control your emotions because your story is what's ruling you.
for me, it became like I would isolate myself, or keep myself away from the people that cared about me most, because A, I knew they could see through my BS, and B, I didn't want to cause them any more worry or pain. So the further I could distance myself, and the less contact I had with them, I felt I was protecting them in a way, which sounds so nuts, but that's how it was in my mind. Like, because I knew I was a mess, and that I didn't want to make any more false promises, and I didn't trust myself.
So if you avoid them, if you take them out of your life, then A, you can't let them down anymore and you can't hurt them, which only sinks your story worse because you're.
And then I don't feel like I have anybody that really knows me. I have no real connections. Like, I went from having this life where everyone loved me, everyone knew me, I was sort of a superstar of what I did, to I still had friends, but nobody had any idea, like, who I really was, and what I had been capable of, and that I wasn't just a partying girlfriend of a successful business that was very good at pretending he was Casanova while he was cracking my skull open and cheating on me, and trying to suffocate me with a pillow at night.
So you go from, really, it's almost like a transition of this young girl who's doing, Adderall, cocaine, ecstasy. Are you using any downers or weed or anything like that to get yourself to sleep? You're just
A couple times, but no, that was never my thing.
So you're just doing the partying, GHB probably at the time. Was that no?
I had a boyfriend that actually dealt it. I did it a little bit, but that wasn't really my thing. That was a downer, so I didn't like it. I don't like to feel out of control of that. I like to feel awake, which is also why I would drink, but I wasn't a big drinker because I never liked to feel drunk, which is why I always wanted to do the uppers, because I wanted to feel, I guess, in control. Yeah.
And so then now you
And
go
I'm still
to
a control freak for sure.
which is not, so that's an interest. So we'll get into that later, but which is not a bad thing. Control is just a need for certainty, but it's how we deal with it. Are we dealing with an empowering way or a disempowering way? Yeah. And we can use drugs to control certainty in a disempowering way, or we can go to the gym and work out, which is also a control thing. It's what
That's my addiction now. Yeah.
And I would say also an addiction for me. It's probably the one thing that kept me from, kind of potentially following a similar path, because I was just so in love with it, and how it made me feel that it allowed me to get me through that. And maybe I'm wrong, but I don't want to necessarily pre-frame this in an awkward way, but it seems like we're about to, follow the story. And this is the first I've heard of the story. So it's like, we're moving from this young, kind of more innocent, party girl, now moving into, and the only reason why I say this is because like what tweaked me to this, and this is more of a question. I'm getting to a question here, which is like you meet your boyfriend, you're semi-sober, but you go away, and then I think you said there was champagne, and then all of a sudden it winds up, and it's like, to me, it's like, okay, if champagne is winding things up, things are progressing.
Well, and I had like I joke because when I was like 18, I was a very late bloomer. Like I didn't kiss a boy till I was 16. My first real boyfriend was when I was 18. I dated him for a year before we ever were intimate. Just because I didn't want to regret anything, if that makes sense. That's just how my moral compass was. It wasn't like I had a set age or time frame. I just didn't want to wake up and regret something that I did. And that's how I was, my moral compass, how I lived my life up until I didn't. And then that's when I had to lie to myself, because I had such a strong sense of intuition and what I was okay with. And then for me to become what I became was so not okay with me. So, yeah, I mean, there was ins and outs, but I dated 4 or 5 really nice guys that I probably could have married, had a golden retriever, a picket fence, and children, and then, I was just young and I didn't appreciate or understand what I had, you know what I mean? And then it was almost, I joke, like once I broke my picker, I picked one bad one, and then it was like they just went from worse to worse to worse to worse. And we did have something special that said whoever we'll call boyfriend for a while. And like I remember probably at about 8 months in was the first time I saw a real red flag. And it was a real red flag. And I knew. I was like, this is something you can't change about someone. And he wasn't cheating on me at that point, but he was acting super irrational. And I knew better, but I was so freaking in love with him because he played a role of being someone that he wasn't for that entire time. So even though I knew all the signs were there, I was so in love with him. We were already living together. I was like, I thought I was going to change him, or that it was just going to be a one-time thing. You lied to yourself and whatever. And I'd known him 13 years prior to that. I never thought of him that way because he was quite a bit older than me. And but so I trusted him in a certain way because I did know him. I don't mean to put him down. I still love him. I will always love him. I'm just not in love with him anymore. I adore his daughter. Like, she became like my therapist, the poor thing. We just destroyed what we had. Like, we both know we did, like we had something super special. We took it for granted. We started using we were using the Adderall together. We both got prescribed it. Then we were abusing that. Then, it just, and then it was sometimes it was Coke, but I never wanted to do the Coke because I hated the Coke. So then it was sometimes him using Coke, which then I wouldn't be, and I would just be annoyed. And then it just was a vicious cycle. Plus, we're raising a 12-year-old. I always felt like it was my job to try to save her, which was also none of my business at the same time, but sort of was. Like, it was just, it was a mess. And then, how we ended up on meth and then just watching it, there was like a group of us and it just, I think I'm me, and I know he got off of it. I think he still like drinks and whatnot. Like he's able to control things better than what I could. But like I caught him stealing my medication along with the girl that he was cheating on me with. Um, 'Cause I always trusted him. Like you can have whatever you want of mine. And then one day I decided to count my medication after I'd gotten it from the pharmacy, and there was half of it missing.
And sorry, when you say medication, so a couple of questions on this is, how many days a week, just out of curiosity, are you guys using drugs
Couldn't get up without
every
that.
day?
So I threw all the meth away thinking I was saving us. He was not very happy about that.
So you're doing meth just to get up out of bed, like get out of bed in the morning?
Literally just to maintain. It was awful. It was just to literally, because otherwise we couldn't get up.
So does it become? And sorry, excuse my. I haven't. I've not done meth before. So, but does that become like a? Does it almost like? Is it like a hangover? Like in the morning, you wake up with a hangover and you have a drink just to kind of.
No, you're just very tired because your body doesn't produce any energy of its own, and it ruins your serotonin. Like from what I understand from treatment, like your serotonin, where like the like pathways, because what the meth does is they're like highways or whatever, or like say a road, and then the meth makes you produce crazy amounts when you do it. You know what I mean? So it goes from being like a 1-lane road to like a 16-lane highway. And so then once you stop, you have a 16-lane highway with only enough serotonin to go down like a bike path. And so that's why people want to eat all the time, because eating actually gives you the same satisfaction as getting high. Which was something I learned this last time that I was in treatment, which made a lot of sense to me of why you always want to eat, because it's comforting for that short amount of time. And it does repair itself, but it takes a long time, I was lucky that I was only on it for 2 years. I wanted to believe him so badly. When I look at it now, I'm like, how dumb are you? Like, it was so obvious that he was lying. But when you're in such denial, like, so I didn't know the difference of the true from the false. And then wanting it to work so badly. And then it was like, I was like being like Inspector Clouseau, like, trying to catch him and doing this and that and the other thing, where like, and finally I was like, I don't want to live like this. Like, this is not life. Like, this is not, what am I doing? And then I just, all of a sudden, even when I used to get the crap beat out of me and I was being cheated on and stuff, at the end of the day, when I would lay my head on the pillow, I always felt safe. And one night, I just didn't feel safe anymore. We weren't fighting, nothing. It was 10:30 p.m. at night. No explanation. I wasn't high, nothing. I just, all of a sudden, got like an overwhelming feeling of not being safe, like that he could leave our gas stove on purpose and kill us both and all the dogs, and no one would ever know. Like, I just had to get out of there. I all of a sudden didn't trust anything. And I just looked at him and I was like, I love you, but I can't do this anymore. And it was 10:30 p.m. and I walked out the door, and then I realized that I didn't trust the other girl with my dog. I knew he wouldn't do anything to her, but she was pretty vindictive. So I went back and got my dog and started walking down the street. And he was like, "What are you doing?" You know, and I was just like, "I just can't do this anymore." And I told him that. Told him, I was like, "Once I'm done, I'm done. Like, I know you don't believe me because I've said that 5,000 times." And I was like, "Also, I want someone that would never let me walk out that door." And he finally came after me that time, but and begged me to get in the car and begged me to do this. I didn't even realize I was choosing to be homeless, if that even makes any sense. Like, and I'm terrified to walk down the street at 10:30 p.m. in the Polo Club, which is like the safest place on the planet. I don't like, you know what I mean? That's not my style. And I'm walking down the street having no idea where I'm going, and like Tory Burch flip flops with my bulldog and my Dolce Gabbana purse, and like I literally had never felt happier in my entire life. Like, I walked out of that house and I felt like the weight of the world had been lifted off my shoulders. I had no idea what I was going to do next, but I was free.
What do you think that was? Do you think that was that paranoia from the drug use, or do you think it was just something inside you that was like, this is the threshold, I've hit the threshold? And
I think it was all of it. I think there was definitely the drug use didn't help. I'm still not entirely sure that they weren't going to try to kill me. That's how sick it got. I hope they weren't, but it wouldn't surprise me. They did some pretty messed up things that I allowed them to put me through, that when I look back on it now, I'm like, what in the world was I thinking? If anybody told me something even close to that, I would backhand them. I could be like, what are you doing?
right. What was it, do you think, when you look back on there? Was it just that you needed someplace to be, someplace to feel like it was home or belonging?
I was really in love with him, and despite all of our fights, we always had chemistry. So that was the thing too, was like, we could get in the biggest fight, but the second we weren't fighting, like every kiss was like the first kiss, like always. So that kept me staying around. I felt safe with him for a while, and then I had also gotten to the point where I'd made myself completely financially dependent on him. So even if I wanted out, couldn't unless I told my dad, and I was so ashamed that, I mean, I had no driver's license. I had to ask him for money to do anything. I had spent a little bit of trust money that I had, like
That probably went on drugs and
vacations, and then he would tell me, "Oh, you spent $200,000 on us. That was 4 years ago," and like, well, make me feel like it didn't count. You know, like I helped remodel our house, like did all this stuff, and I told him I wasn't good with money, and like help me manage the money, and like maybe we should do this. None of it's his fault, whatever. But I blew through that money, same thing, buying drugs. And he was, no, the first thing someone that cheats on you does is accuses you of cheating. And that is the one thing that I will not do. I will not be in a relationship with you if I want to be with someone else. I just won't. I don't like two people. I rarely like someone enough to even date them in the first place, let alone two of them. So if I think that I want to date someone that badly, or even think about kissing someone else and I'm in a relationship, I will break up with that person first, because that's just always, my mother always taught me to treat people the way you want to be treated, and that's how I am. And so I think because he had been a cheater his entire life, he projected a lot of that on me. And so then I was always trying to prove my loyalty to him, which was the one thing that he never needed to worry about with me.
do you think that's something that he was doing maybe to control you?
100%.
Yeah, it seems like it. And that's, so for any young women who are listening to this, that is a very common strategy of men who are trying to control. Especially, and it's actually not just women. It's people, even in business, you'll see that that's the narcissistic kind of playbook.
100%. And I can see it from a mile away now in relationships. It doesn't have to have anything. I haven't been in a romantic relationship since I ended that one. And that was over 2.5 years ago. And my plan was just to stick with the, not being with anyone for a year, because that's what is suggested in sobriety. And I haven't even seen anyone worth looking at on the menu. Plus, my standards are just totally different. Like, I have no interest in a one night stand. I have no interest in, plus I don't drink anymore. So it's like, that's the chances of that happening are pretty much no. You know what I mean? And I'm quite picky, as I used to be my entire life, until I wasn't, when I lowered my standards in such a way. But yeah, the narcissistic thing is, and I see it everywhere. I see it at the horse show, in the relationships, business relationships, and it's everywhere, and people being controlled by it, and people having no boundaries and being afraid to. You're the bad guy if you set a boundary for yourself. Like, God forbid that you say the word no, or that don't speak to me like that. Like.
Yeah. It's a telltale sign when somebody gets offended when you say something like that. You can pretty much bet you're working with a narcissist. So,
Yeah.
I want to move into your journey of sobriety and the lessons learned there. But I'm curious, like, you leave your boyfriend, and I think you're homeless for a little while.